was acceptable. The sheet that you picked up coming in, I don't know how much we'll talk about it today. We might kind of get into some things here towards the end. Certainly tomorrow we'll take a look at it. All I did with this sheet was put some concepts that are present definitely in the first 15 chapters of the book. So all things here prior to what you were reading for the rest of the book, for the last 250 pages. And then we're going to look at the idea of repetition as to how these things come back throughout the second half of the book. So that's the reason for this being here. We might kind of start to touch on some of those things as we go over some things today. If not, certainly tomorrow after your poetry quiz, we'll be able to do that. I think I know, or at least have an idea, partially based on things that you were writing in your TWAs, but also based from where some people usually kind of get confused a little bit, about topics, scenes, individuals that folks have questions about. But certainly open up to you first. Anything with 16 through epilogue where it felt like need clarification, where you started seeing some stuff that you were hoping you could write about on a TWA, and that evil prompt just didn't allow it to happen.
Where did, just Ross?
Yep.
Where did he get a horse? Why was he riding around on a horse in the
Why
middle
not?
of like
Yeah.
gun and fire?
I think he was supposed to represent one of the horses like that.
I didn't know.
Ben, I didn't hear what you said.
I think he was supposed to represent
Or, do you remember the name of the horse in his own?
Did it have a name? I know it was a black horse.
Tim referenced it, like, not that horse, oh, that is this horse right here. But he goes, Roz is riding on his, it's more of an illusion. It's Man-O-War.
Oh,
Man-O-War,
yeah.
which is a famous racehorse. So again, a little bit kind of punny stuff that's going on. But yeah, you have Roz, you have him, spear the dress that he has with like his chieftain garb on, as opposed to what you would normally expect, and all that kind of stuff. And at this point, Roz, you have a shift in who he is, because originally he is the exhorter,
Now he's the destroyer.
and now he becomes the destroyer.
That's like the coolest name ever.
Roz the destroyer.
No,
Yeah.
Sam the destroyer.
Not yet.
Not
Roz the destroyer, Calavero.
We named a unit after
Could
me.
have Sophia the exhorter and Sam the destroyer,
Yeah. Oh, that'd be cool.
or should it go the other way?
I think
More likely to destroy.
Fia would be more likely to extort.
It's not extort.
Oh, sorry. Wait,
So, and this was going to be one of the questions. What does it mean if you are an exhorter? If you are trying to exhort, because a lot of people will go, extorter, where you're trying to manipulate someone. But if you're trying to exhort someone, you are trying to,
Get something out of them.
essentially. To exhort is to like urge,
No, that's you.
to speak up. Well, that's both of them. So if I'm exhorting you to, I think you should really get your AP multiple choice done by 4 o'clock today. I just think it would be better for you. I have no particular reason for it. I'd be exhorting you to try to do something. So it would be something more of like a speaker, which Roz certainly is. Now you could argue that Tim is, and Clifton and all those folks as well. But here by the end, he is now going from someone to speak up, where it's now becoming a person of action, but it's certainly not a positive action that's taking place. One of the reasons why I definitely think that he is in this kind of dress is Roz. What's his descent?
Ethiopian or African.
Jamaican.
Is that
Okay.
why his name is Ross? Is for Ross?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's where he's getting part of the idea from. He's Jamaican descent. Obviously, powerful speaker. He would be someone where, how would you look at his viewpoint towards brotherhood and whites in comparison to like a Tim and a Clifton? Like if we were to compare and contrast Roz with them,
Ross uses anger and fear tactics.
okay, so a lot more hostility kind of taking place.
I was gonna say Roz like hates all whites.
Okay, and if you're someone who is helping the whites, then he's going to hate you as well. Hence, knife fight with Clifton and all that kind of stuff.
But like Brotherhood wants cooperation as to like unify people, and Roz is like, no, like you more white people, and we are like black people, and we do not cooperate. So we just stay in a low thing.
Until the end when we find out the brotherhood doesn't want cooperation, but yeah,
Yeah.
no, that would be legitimate. Roz, from a historical aspect, you know, we talk about the founder and Booker T. Washington and all that stuff. Roz, from a historical aspect, matches up with Marcus Garvey. One of the sources that you'll get tomorrow on Thursday is a speech by Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey would be more of a black nationalist. Marcus Garvey is from Jamaica. Marcus Garvey did get referenced slightly within Invisible Man when the evicted couple, their belongings were being thrown out. One of the things in there is a newspaper article that talks about Marcus Garvey being deported. Marcus Garvey was deported from the United States for a couple reasons were going on. But one of the things that Garvey said is basically whites and blacks will never get along. So we should stop pretending that we're going to get along, and at this point we should separate, where he would be arguing that they should establish a new black nationalist area. He was looking at Liberia in Africa, where basically blacks, we should leave. So with, I was going to point to Maria, with you asking about him being on horse, chieftain garb and things like that, part of the, if you're aligning him with Garvey, the idea that we should go back to where we came from, we would be better off there. So it's more, you know, to his quote unquote roots, so to speak, as opposed to, you know, trying to fit into New York City in the 1930s, 1940s. So I think that kind of ties in. Although I like Ben's idea too with Four Horsemen Apocalypse. But you know, the idea going back to Africa, it's not going to work here. We should absolutely leave. So he is certainly going to be an either you're with us or you're against us. If you're part of the Brotherhood, I'm going to try to throw a spear at you. Fortunately, Tim has good aim. And where does Tim hit him with the spear? Right in the jaw, so the exhorter can no longer speak. You know, so he's basically silenced him at that point.
You should be friends with this Ratchet.
What was the point of Sybil? Like, what was that?
Oh, Sybil.
Why you gotta bring that up?
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Every good book has to have one.
We all have to have a prostitute or
Crazy
something like that.
Was she a prostitute?
No.
No.
Like,
She was just so little.
she was just a mess. Sybil was struggling.
She was like,
I kind of like fast
Sybil
forward
was
that
running
chapter.
around the streets of New York.
Was she like chasing after him?
Yes.
a lonely alcoholic housewife.
Well, what's his whole plan with her?
Wants to with her.
Yeah.
To find out conspiracies of the difference.
Okay, so he's using her as a means to gain, info, intel about Brotherhood.
And wait, she's a different girl than the one from earlier.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and you're thinking about Hubert's wife,
Yeah.
like when he first is getting switched over to the women's movement and all that kind of stuff, where the husband shows up.
Yeah.
Although it's kind of similar in scene that's taking place. One thing, and I wouldn't say this necessarily ties in directly with Sybil, but what does Tim decide that he's going to do at this point so far as with the Brotherhood in general? Because Clifton, has been killed, and
He wants to like agree them with like yeses. He wants to like help them run themselves into the ground.
which sounds an awful lot like who earlier. It sounds like grandfather's advice, agreeing with yeses, till they vomit, swallow, and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to run them into the ground, but we're going to agree and kind of play the part with it. So you have a shift from the way that he was acting with before, where he is going to try to agree them to death. He thinks about utilizing Emma. That's not going to work, so we decided to go with Sybil, since she's still a pretty much higher up. The problem is that his plan doesn't work because Sybil turns it completely into this is what I want to have happen, where it becomes more of her desire, her kind of racial stereotype that's taking place. So the whole plan completely backfires on him. In the sense that she wants him to fulfill her fantasy. So she's not doing what? Seeing him for the way that he, again, wants to be seen. So you still have that kind of struggle going on. Pardon? Yeah, so you still certainly have some blindness happening. Any ideas about that?
That I did not. I was
Santa
confused.
Claus?
When you were like Santa Claus, I
He
was
sees
on his
you when
belly.
you're sleeping.
He was like, you guys raped by Santa Claus, and I was like, what is going on?
Well, but then he erases it.
He does.
Yeah, but
Yeah, because he feels guilty for having written it, even though he doesn't physically do anything. I'm not 100% sure if connection is purposeful or not by Ellison, but I noticed, I think it was last year, when it was rereading Norton chapter with True Blood, that I think it's on 2 occasions, Tim describes Norton's face as having rosy cheeks and all that kind of stuff like Santa Claus. Now, he's not saying you were raped by Norton or anything, quite that direct with it, but in some ways, I feel like by going back to Norton, and Norton shows up later on in the text, with the subway in the epilogue where he fails to see him, where he's almost kind of being created by that education that was taking place at the college, by the white influence, by the Northern trustees, and all those kinds of things. That I'm essentially a creation of you folks of Santa Claus, if that's maybe being a reference to Norton. I'm not 100% sure with the Santa Claus part. That's one that you'd have to have a seance and have Ellison come back and, hey, what was going on? But part of me feels like, hey, he must be doing something where he's kind of making a little bit of a reference to Norton and the whole, just the scene where Norton's getting brought in, and you have the whole True Blood thing happening, Golden Day, which is all very sexual chapters and scenes occurring anyway. But the big thing I would say with Sybil is his plan doesn't work because he still failed to be recognized the way that he wants to be seen, but he's not going to follow through with what her plan would be because that's going to be too much of a stereotype. You can also tell that he hasn't lost his morality because in the next day when he realizes that Harlem's in trouble, that you have this whole riot taking place, he makes sure that she's able to try to get home at some point. And then when he sees the mannequin hanging from the lamp out on the street, his first reaction is it's Sybil, and then no, it's just a mannequin that's coming from the thing. But I think the sexual stereotype that gets applied in the Battle Royale, True Blood, you still have happening with Hubert's wife. I think Sybil's still kind of fulfilling that kind of aspect that's there. But yeah, that's one chapter where you a little squeamish.
I'm excited.
Okay. So whenever there was that little brawl in the alleyway, it started out in the street, it was like
Oh no, Clifton and Ross?
there was like the Brotherhood was having like a little thing going down in the streets of Harlem, and then Raz and his goons they showed up and started attacking them, right?
Mhm.
Remember that?
Mhm.
Okay, so like there was clearly supposed to be something with like the checks cashier thing, and I like didn't fully understand what the purpose of that was. You remember what I'm talking about? Like Clifton and Raz were like duking it out next to this bank, and
Mhm.
all the lights were out except for this one neon light that said checks cashed here.
Oh,
And then they had the whole talking scene there, and then at the very end, Clifton like socked him one, and then basically like Raz like fell into the checks cashed here. Neon sign.
The light was like shining, it was like
Red.
blood on his face.
It was like reddish pink, I think.
It's kind of it's similar to the specific purpose for it being checks cashed here as to what it says.
I don't know. I know that. Yeah.
I honestly I don't know. Haven't given a whole lot of thought with it. I would agree that with the light kind of shine because you're getting like that neon redness that kind of comes back. Where I always at the very there's certainly this idea with like blood and highlighting blood be a big part. Like even the name Bloodso, True Blood.
Yeah.
The Black Powerhouse that people talk about that kind of powers the college has the red blood-stained windows that go along with it. So the big thing with it highlighting the blood, and I know this doesn't answer the question the way that you were looking at it, but you have Roz versus Clifton and Tim, but pretty much it's Roz and Clifton.
Yeah.
Roz is black. Clifton is
Also black.
also black. Compared to Tim, What's Todd look like?
It's dark.
He's like, so when Emma says, "Don't you think he should be a little blacker?" back in chapter 14, Clifton kind of like fulfills that role
Yeah.
that she would be looking for. But we talked about where you have black on black violence, battle royale. Even though there's not a physical fight, Bledsoe Tim kind of
Yeah.
duking it out, sparring, and then Brockway and Tim. That idea continues on in here, where battling themselves for supremacy. So I think by having like the blood being highlighted a little bit more, you kind of start to see the violence that's really certainly taking place. Plus, this is a guy who ultimately becomes a destroyer. One thing, and there's not, I think we even talked about it like lightly the one time, there's not too many people named Todd anymore. When I went to high school, there was a couple Todds, but they've kind of disappeared. I've never had Todd as a student. Yeah.
Well, their names are Hebrew.
Have some Teds every now and then,
Yeah.
or
Teddy Jackson. I think it was by Teddy.
Oh yeah, there's Teddy.
he does go by Teddy.
Yeah.
Poor collarbone.
I know.
I beat him in arm wrestling. Don't believe what they said about hockey. How do you spell Todd?
TODD.
Normally it's Todd. Anyone taking German? You're taking Latin.
Yeah.
No German.
No German?
I was in Latin with you, Sam.
Yeah, no, but I thought you started over in German one. No, okay.
Tod means death
In German.
in German.
Death.
Definitely.
Which, not that Roz ends up killing him, but what happens to Clifton with result of the Brotherhood, he kind of breaks free. Part of it certainly could be pressure from Roz, not to necessarily join him, but to kind of make him question about what he's doing. A lot of folks have questions when it comes to Clifton about him and his Sambo dolls.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sambo doll would match up best with the bank from chapter 15, so far as a derogatory image, picture, and things like that. I remember growing up, and no, we did not have Sambo dolls, but I remember growing up Halloween, we had like cardboard, like dolls, like skeletons and scarecrows that had tissue paper arms and legs, and so you would hang them on a door, and so when you open and close the door, the arms would kind of start moving around and all that kind of stuff. People would put them outside, kind of like a streamer type thing. That's sort of what a Sambo doll would be, in that it's a paper doll. Now, what does Tim notice about the doll after he picks it up?
It's
Smart
controlled
like
by
on the sides.
Yeah.
It has, and of course he has to go, can't just say string, since it's Invisible Man, he has to go invisible clear string, that he didn't kind of see. But the Sambo doll is essentially a puppet.
Just like Tim.
Just like Tim is a puppet. You're rubbing off on me.
Yeah.
Just like Tim is a puppet, just like Clifton realizes that he is kind of becoming a puppet as being controlled by the Brotherhood. So if he already is a puppet, you know what? I may as well go about and just sell these little, racist puppets, so to speak, because that's entirely who I am becoming at this point. So I do think that fight with Roz, I know this doesn't do anything with what you were asking about with the checks being cashed here thing. Hey, payments due. Next time you get in a fight, checks are cashed here, and then you can attack Cade and see what
Yeah.
happens. But I think Roz certainly at least kind of gets Clifton to kind of question motives a little bit, and that's where the whole Sambo doll keeps coming in. So whereas Tim kind of realizes that he's like the bank, or might not realize that he's the bank, but we as readers kind of realize that he's like the bank, Clifton is becoming like the Sambo doll. But he recognizes it at this point. And that becomes really the turning point for Tim, because now he gives his great funeral speech, and then Brother Jack and company aren't too happy with that. And then eyes fall out. Just stretch.
So, Clifton left the Brotherhood because he realized that he was just like a full puppet.
That's the conclusion that he
Yeah.
kind of, yeah.
And then, so, Brother Jack is white,
Mhm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Are all of the, like, lead brothers white?
Primarily, Clifton, obviously, lead brothers in that, Jack, Hambro, the person who is training Tim, is white. Tim, Clifton, Westrom, black, but Westrum's the guy who is accusing him with the whole magazine article. And then brother Tobit is white, but he is married to African American woman. So Tarp is black, but the power structure for the most part, yes, would be white. And keep in mind, and where I said we should have a seance to try to talk to Ellison as to what do you mean with Santa Claus and all that kind of stuff, he is on record as going, brotherhood is meant to be equated with Communist Party. So it would make sense that your leadership is primarily going to be white. You are trying to recruit more and more people so that you can get strength in numbers. When you realize that Harlem ends up being expendable and it's not something that you truly need, you know what, we'll just let it kind of blow itself up. So the whole Roz thing, you know, you could certainly have your conspiracy theory, and it would make sense that they kind of use Roz to their benefit to eliminate all of Harlem, because now we don't have to worry about it. We can move on to bigger and better things. Ellison kind of dabbles with Communist Party a little bit in the 1930s. Some of his friends do, and they truly feel alienated by it because what they promise that they're going to deliver doesn't ever really actually kind of happen. And I kind of start to see that happening with the Brotherhood, you know, certainly at the end.
I feel like I got a little bit of like a reference, not like necessarily to communism, but like, remember, who was the one that was trying to get like the Brotherhood to turn against Tim? Who was the brother?
What, Westrum?
Yeah. Whenever
With
he
the
came
magazine article?
in, and he was talking. He was saying like we should get a symbol to put on all of our, or like an emblem to put on all of our arms, so we don't accidentally beat each other up. And they didn't make a direct reference to the Nazis. Or no, he made reference to Clifton during like a march, how he accidentally socked like someone.
Yeah, no, and you get some just the fascism in general, Nazi,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. Well, and then with the, not that meeting, but the one after, you know, post Clifton speech, a couple things pop out literally with that meeting. One of them being Jack's eye.
Who's left or right eye?
Oh, yeah, he like, did he purposely pop his eye out to like make the dare?
Well, I don't think it's more of he's getting upset, and as he's like fist pounding and all that kind of stuff, it comes out. He doesn't do a watch this, which would be, you know, a pretty interesting little trick to do. Which you can kind of look at it in multiple ways. Number one, Jack is,
White.
that's not the word I was going for, but
It's been
that was
racist.
anticlimactic.
Yeah.
I could just like think this
Jack is blind. Thanks, Sam.
So I don't know where you're going for here.
my stuff I felt like
So he cannot see Tim.
Right.
Could also argue, why is Jack blind? I mean, he says,
He was fighting for.
I was fighting for a cause, so the Brotherhood, you could switch this from being an adjective to the Brotherhood, a verb, blinds. Kind of the creepy little thing, and some people, depending upon what prompt they are answering yesterday, were making reference to Tim's first Brotherhood speech, where he is giving it in the boxing arena, where a prize fighter lost his fight. His whole, people have been dispossessed scene. Remember the analogy that he uses is it's like we have two people walking on each side of the street following the white line, and both of them can only see out of one eye, and so they don't necessarily realize what is going on. And so in some ways it's like he's really kind of talking about the Brotherhood, possibly Jack there. What does Tim say? And I would say this is where you kind of get references again to the whole communist idea. What does Tim say that upsets Jack and the rest of the leaders? And I would say this kind of harkens back to the Battle Royale when he gives that graduation speech. Why did you feel that you had to give that speech for Clifton? It was my...
Like personal, something social. Yeah. No, it was something.
No, it's something about
my
like personal something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's my personal responsibility.
Which, Ben saying social responsibility,
Is that responsibility?
it in that initial speech that he has, so we have the personal responsibility, versus like the group's responsibility. You also then had that social responsibility versus social equality that you had way back with the whole briefcase speech that was taking place at the Battle Royale. Here you kind of have it with the Brotherhood, again in both times, and going to your question about the power structure, the Brotherhood being predominantly white, and certainly this audience here would be very much white, just like you had that white audience in Chapter 1, you're having this audience here, I think this is Chapter 22, that is taking place, where, both times he's being held accountable for how he's going about saying things. I would say here, he certainly is a little bit more resolute and stands his ground a little bit more so than he certainly would be doing here, but there's still some ignorance, naive that exists within him. My favorite character in the book is right after this part, where he never meets him,
Reinhardt?
but he gets mistaken for Reinhardt.
Oh yeah.
Not because he's a pimp stain. That's not why he's my favorite character. Who's Reinhardt?
He's just kind of like a cool guy in Arnold.
Well, there's like a lot of
He's
different
rich.
guys. Some of them not cool at all.
He's wealthy.
I mean, we don't know like how wealthy, but he definitely, dresses nice, has some money. He has some money because he's
Pimp.
pimp.
He's a reverend.
How can you get
That's the
He's a
question.
bookie.
Yeah, he is a bookie.
Bookie, like numbers, a numbers man. So there's going to be some kind of tie-in with some type of organized crime. Did you pick up on what his first name is?
Or the J.
No. His middle initial's P. His first name is B. Bliss P. Reinhardt. Says it on his church. Right? So sermon, by Reinhardt. Growing up, there was a Presbyterian church. They had Pastor Crummy. So every week they had like the Crummy sermon title that was on the billboard. Maria, whatever you do in life, don't marry someone with the last name of Crummy. Okay. Should you become published, you don't want crummy poems and crummy books. What happens when Tim's Reinhardt?
Everybody loves him. Not everybody,
But everybody
respect.
knows
Yeah.
him, okay? And that could be whether you are black, whether you are white. I mean, the white policemen know who he is. They could be male, they could be female, young, old, wealthy, poor. You could be someone who is, more social appropriate and conservative, or you could be someone who's running with a whole nother of people, but people know him, people like him. How in the world are you able to pull this off?
With a pair of glasses and a hat.
Apparently with a pair of glasses and a nice fedora that you would have on. What can Reinhardt do that's kind of like the opposite of Tim? Tim's problem throughout the whole entire book is he is not seen. He's failed to be recognized.
Reinhardt seemed no matter what.
But what does Reinhardt do that Tim cannot do? And I think this is why he's Bliss.
This is like the whole thing.
He can be whoever he wants to be in a given situation. So whereas Tim can't be recognized the way that he desires to be, Reinhardt is able to kind of pull off what he wants to be whenever he wants to be. So at this point, Tim kind of starts to maybe subconsciously realize that there is a little bit of benefit to being invisible if you're able to use it to your own benefit. Going all the way back to the prologue, how does Tim use his invisibility to his benefit?
Can steal his power from power company.
Yeah, I'm also thinking with an individual, but you're right with that one.
Kill a person.
He doesn't kill a person,
Oh,
but
like beats the crap out.
you're mugged by a ghost. So because the person failed to recognize him, Tim attacks him, becomes much more brutal. but he also uses his invisibility to his benefit at that point because the person's not going to be able to identify who he is. So from Reinhardt, he kind of recognizes that, okay, I can quote unquote play the game a little bit. And this is when he decides to switch, that he's going to become more active within the Brotherhood, where I'm going to agree with them, but I'm going to use it in order to undermine them the way that Reinhardt is able to use other people to his benefit. I don't necessarily think it means that Ellison's going, you want to be like Reinhardt and buy your sunglasses and a fedora and be a reverend and a pimp all at the same time, but there certainly can be some happiness or some blissful pleasure that comes along with being a person of Reinhardt's ilk, kind of, so to speak, throughout. So you certainly, at the very least, see some development of Tim. And Tim, who is blind throughout most of the book, of course, you do get his symbolic. He's able to see at the very end, because what does he do with his diploma, with his Sambo doll, with his identity? He's able to burn it, and keep in mind, all those things have been in his briefcase, so he's able to burn the baggage, the weight, all that stuff that he's been carrying with him, over pretty much that point, the last 10 to 15 years.
Well, yeah, how long was like from when he got it to like the end of the last
Yeah, the only real time reference that you have is at the beginning of chapter 1. He says going back to high school graduation some 20 years ago.
I'm so tired. That was totally my
So
fault.
like the end of the last chapter, when the epilogue,
Like the epilogue.
is that like right before the epilogue?
So the epilogue and the prologue would definitely be the same time.
Yeah.
You're talking about like the end of like 25 when he goes underground.
Yeah.
He's definitely underground for a while because, he talks about, I've been hibernating, which, it's going to be more than a winter. It's time for me to kind of resurface and come back. So there's some hope for him that he's coming back above ground, but he's been under there for, I would think, some time. He's in college for 3 years, working his way through,
There's a couple time
he's
references.
underground at least 10 years.
Okay. Because I didn't think it was.
Just leave it off stage.
This.
No, we actually did.
Like,
We were just gonna go over
when it's
questions.
over,
We
I
haven't
think,
been-
Yeah, I'll help you guys.
Do you want my notes?
AP
But we'll have to
multiple
do it
choice.
at 7. Is
I
that
said,
just
remember, share that tomorrow, and then, or share that tonight.
Practice for
Tomorrow,
yeah.
softball?
Softball.
Thursday, you're gonna get some problem choices for Monday. I recorded it today, so you can say hi to yourself. And then take a look at it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Sam didn't say too many.
Say that again?
Sam didn't say too many weird things today.